want you to imagine a scene. The year is 2006. An employee walks out of the headquarters of one of the world's largest companies. They have a briefcase in their hand, a briefcase full of secrets. Inside that briefcase are the most confidential product files and trade secrets, prepared with the company's multi-billion-dollar research and development budget. And this employee takes that briefcase and goes directly to their biggest rival. They go and say, "I'll sell all these secrets to you for $1.5 million. Imagine, we are talking about two arch enemies who have been trying to destroy each other for over a century. I mean, normally, what would you expect? You'd expect the rival company to snatch that briefcase out of the air and use that opportunity to the fullest to bury their enemy in history, right? They didn't. They immediately called the FBI and their rival. It's truly an incredible event. Then, agents disguised as rival company executives caught this employee red-handed. You know, this isn't just a police case. I think it's one of the most fascinating, most philosophical moments in the history of commerce. It's actually a tremendous lesson on the nature of competition. Yes, today on our table, we have an incredible pile of resources that seem completely unrelated, but will blow our minds when combined. From neuromarketing research diving into the dark depths of the consumer brain, to Alfred Adler's famous birth order psychology, the adapted versions of which for the corporate world are truly eye-opening. And, of course, the historical case analyses of those arch enemies, Pepsi and Coca-Cola. But there is a different lens through which we will read this century-long war today. The 17 Rules of Success in Napoleon Hill's legendary book, Think and Grow Rich. We usually read Hill's rules as, individual success, personal development, wake up early, motivation, and so on. It's generally perceived as leadership motivation. However, the perspective the sources offer us is much more structural. We are actually applying those principles, like determining a clear purpose or learning from hardships, to the genetic codes of multi-billion-dollar giant organizations. And thus, we can see why those companies sometimes make brilliant and sometimes incredibly stupid decisions. Today, that is the core mission of Catalyst Power anyway. We are going to take the cola wars out of being just a market share fight on the shelves. As an entrepreneur, we will look for how you can emerge stronger from massive crises in your own business, and what universal lessons you can learn from the mistakes of these giants. We can think of this situation like a massive chess match lasting a century. A wonderful analogy. Instead of grandmasters, we have billion-dollar companies at the table, and we will analyze these moves with Napoleon Hill's rulebook. Let's see who followed the rules more. But before heading down to the battlefronts, I think we need to understand the psychological DNA of these two opposing sides. That Adler theory in the sources really caught my interest. Can we really analyze the psychology of a company just like the childhood traumas of a human being? If you look at it through Alfred Adler's theory, absolutely yes. Adler says that your birth order in the family determines your worldview and survival strategy, meaning like being the first child or the second child. Now let's look at Coca-Cola. Born in 1886, the absolute big brother of the market, the first child. The instinct to protect the existing order is very dominant in them. Because they are already on the throne, the attention is on them. They are respectful of authority, conservative, and focus on defending the legacy they possess. When I look at Coca-Cola's communication strategy, this conservatism is very clearly readable. Think about those commercials. Always those giant tables bringing the family together. Those traditional Santa Claus figures, polar bears. Always a tradition. Always that protective, dignified figure. They literally have a stance of, I am here, I set the rules. Exactly. And then, in 1898, the second child is born, Pepsi. The trouble begins. Exactly. Adler says that second children perceive the world completely differently. When they are born, there is already a figure bigger and stronger than them that they must surpass. So they are constantly trying to catch up with that big brother. Yes, that's why they develop a much more aggressive, more enterprising character. To get the attention of the family, that is, the market, they have to bend the rules and shout louder. This analogy fits so well right now. Pepsi's emphasis on youth. Those legendary commercials with Michael Jackson. the rebellion, being the choice of a new generation, and so on. None of it is a coincidence. So it wasn't just a random marketing tactic. This is literally the existential character, the genetics of the company. If we read this through the lens of Napoleon Hill, we see a perfect example of the first rule: definiteness of purpose. Pepsi's sole, almost obsessive purpose was to surpass that big brother. And they combined this clear purpose with Hill's 8th rule: enthusiasm. They used the endless energy and rebellion of youth as a weapon. In contrast, Coca-Cola thought they were applying Hill's 10th rule: accurate thinking, because actually, they had fallen into an arrogance of, I am the biggest, everyone has to drink me. The delusion of being the master of the market. Arrogance always creates blindness. And this blindness led to one of the most shocking mistakes in the history of the Big Brother in the 70s. Yes, the famous Pepsi Challenge blind taste tests. That moment when the little brother hit his older brother right in the heart, meaning in the taste. They give people 2 glasses of cola with the brands hidden, and about 57% of the participants choose Pepsi. 57% is a very serious ratio. There is actually a biological reason for this. Pepsi is slightly sweeter as a formula. In those one-sip blind tastings, the human brain always prefers that first burst of sugar. This is a very simple evolutionary fact. But for some reason, Coca-Cola management doesn't see this as a small biological detail. They enter a full-blown existential crisis. Because their identity is shaken, when the market share starts to erode, they make that unbelievable decision. In 1985, they spend exactly $4 million, conduct 190,000 blind taste tests, and change their sacred 99-year-old formula. New Coke emerges. Moreover, they do this by throwing the old formula completely in the trash. They literally betray their own legacy, the historical weight that being the first child gave them. And then, of course, all hell breaks loose. 8,000 complaint calls a day. Think about it. Cola's poured into the streets. Massive protests. The consumer feels betrayed. They can only withstand that pressure for 79 days. Then they have to return to the old formula under its classic name, But. However, the part that blew my mind while reading the sources isn't actually this. After this fiasco, when the old Coke returns to the shelves, sales explode with incredible speed. Their market share shoots up like a rocket. Explain this irrationality to me, please. $4 million was thrown away. The public was enraged. The worst marketing decision in history was made. But at the end of the day, Coca-Cola became even stronger. How can a company fall upwards on the ladder of failure? Well, the answer to this lies neither in classic marketing books nor in sales tables. The answer lies directly in the deep working principles of the human brain. Neuromarketing enters here. In 2003, a neuroscientist named Dr. Red Montague decided to repeat these famous blind taste tests inside MRI machines. They have people drink cola inside the device. The beverage is given into their mouths via special tubes while they are inside the machine. In that blind tasting stage where they don't know the brands, just like in 75, the reward centers of their brains light up. The tongue perceives that intense sugar and logically says, this is more delicious. And again, most of them choose Pepsi, of course. Yes, more than half still say Pepsi. If this were a rational engineering problem, Pepsi should have won that war forever, but they can't. Why? Because Dr. Montague takes the experiment one step further and this time tells people beforehand which brand they are drinking. That's where the real story begins. And at that moment, something incredible happens in the brain scans in the MRI machine. The moment they see the brand, the hippocampus, the memory center of the brain, suddenly fires up. So the brain literally switches to a different gear when it sees the brand. Much more happens. Those emotional centers literally crush the rational, this is sweeter signal sent by the tongue. A biological override occurs inside the brain. So the sense of taste is deactivated. 75% of the participants say they prefer Coca-Cola when they see the brand, even though they had chosen Pepsi in the blind taste test just a moment before. This is a terrifyingly powerful weapon. Neuromarketing actually proves this to us. Consumers don't shop with their taste buds, but with the memories the brain has built with that brand. with that childhood, with that nostalgic sense of belonging. In other words, Coca-Cola didn't score an own goal with that new Coke crisis. They just tested, even if by accident, that the emotional bond in their customers' brains is hundreds of times stronger than the rational sense of taste. They saw that their public relations machine was, in a way, bulletproof. Hill's 13th rule is very clear on this: learning from hardships and defeats. There is a blessing in every evil. According to Hill, every defeat carries within it the seed of an equivalent success. When Coke management asked, "Where did we go wrong?" during that crisis, they realized that massive universal truth. They said, "We aren't selling drinks. We are selling a culture." People love the memory the brand makes them feel, not the product. If they hadn't learned this lesson from that defeat and had succumbed to fear, trying to keep both brands, both the new Coke and the classic, in the market and causing confusion, perhaps they could have vanished. I think this is the clearest lesson for an entrepreneur to take from here. Your product's features or technical metrics might be weaker than your competitors on paper. Yes, for example, it might have less sugar. But if you have established a solid place for yourself in that user's hippocampus in their memories, that emotional capital will pull you out of even the biggest crises. Does this emotional capital work with the same magic in every geography, under every condition? I mean, did this brand power that hacked our brains in America provide the same invincibility to these guys on the global chessboard? We are at a great point, because when the business goes to the international market, diplomacy and crisis management change the game completely. Emotional bond is a credit, yes, but if you don't support that credit with infrastructure in the international arena, you collapse. Just the power of the product isn't enough. The way to win the war in the global market is not the taste of the product, but taking the distribution network in that country, that is, the local power, to your side. Hill's second rule comes into play right here: the Mastermind alliance. The Venezuela example in the sources, I read it like a spy thriller. Pepsi has a distributor in Venezuela for 57 years, a man named Oswaldo Cisneros. The man is like the king of Pepsi there. 80% of the market is in his hands. 57 years. It's a lifetime. How can you tear down such a deep-rooted alliance from the outside? If you were an ordinary competitor, you couldn't. But Coca-Cola's legendary CEO at the time, Roberto Goizueta, doesn't just make a simple, rational move like offering more money. He takes Cisneros and makes him feel that he isn't just a distributor. He positions him as a global partner, a member of the Mastermind. He literally strokes the man's ego. He invites him to their headquarters in Atlanta, shares his vision, and actually opens up a priceless area of prestige for him in Coca-Cola's massive global system. Meaning, he invests not just in his wallet, but in his vision and status, and the result becomes that famous commando operation. I couldn't believe it when I read that part. Cisneros secretly signs a $500 million deal with Coke, and in a midnight operation in Venezuela, thousands of Pepsi signs in the country are replaced with Coca-Cola signs by dawn. Imagine the people of Venezuela wake up the next morning, and there is no such thing as Pepsi left in their country. All the shops have been painted red. That is so ruthless. You wake up in the morning and your partner of half a century has made a deal with your enemy and surrendered all your castles in one night. This is a brutal example showing how alliances are much more important than the product itself. But I want to stop here. I think these mastermind victories must have created a serious invincibility syndrome in Coca-Cola management. Because there is a crisis that broke out in Europe in 1999, and they paid a very, very heavy price for that arrogant, nothing can happen to us attitude there. The Belgium crisis. Initially, it seemed like a very small event. 24 schoolchildren were hospitalized with complaints of nausea after drinking cola. The source of the problem was a type of fungus on the transport pallets, or a very slight deviation in the quality of carbon dioxide. Actually, a technical issue that could be solved immediately on the production line. But the new CEO of the time, Douglas Ivester, sees the issue as a purely rational and engineering problem. I mean, he comes out and says there is no chemical harmful to health. There's just a bad smell, nothing to make a big deal of. And for 10 whole days, He doesn't appear before the press and make a single significant statement. In crisis communication, 10 days is an eternity. This is the moment when Hill's sixth rule, personal initiative, was completely abandoned. The leader's failure to step forward and take initiative and responsibility shows us how that emotional capital accumulated over years can turn into hatred in an instant. During that 1 0-day silence, a mass hysteria is already taking place in Europe. People start claiming that there is rat poison in the colas. Through word of mouth, France, the Netherlands, and Switzerland ban sales completely all of a sudden. 14 million cases of cola are recalled from the shelves, and they start losing $3.4 million a day. It turns out that throne you built in our brains, that takeover of the hippocampus, can be destroyed in 10 days of arrogance. The credit runs out. So how do you think Ivester reversed this disaster when he realized his mistake? Is there a rule there too? They desperately returned to Napoleon Hill's principles out of necessity. The fourth rule, going the extra mile. Ivester finally took initiative and placed full-page ads in Belgian newspapers. He apologized to everyone, saying, "I am wrong. I should have spoken sooner." But of course, this was just a beginning. To repair that broken emotional bond, they had to really push the limits, go the extra mile. Let me tell you what I read. They sent free Coca-Cola products to exactly 4.37 million homes in Belgium, nearly the entire country. An incredible logistical operation. 5,000 delivery personnel went door to door. This isn't just a "let's compensate for our loss" move. It's literally making a massive interest payment to that frozen trust account. And interestingly, I was very surprised to read this in the sources. While the European continent was painted red and Coke was losing significant blood, their arch-enemy Pepsi didn't act opportunistically and attack, meaning they didn't increase their advertising budgets and try to crush Coke in its weak moment. Why do you think? I don't suppose we can say they felt sorry for the big brother. On the contrary, they realized a very large and dangerous truth there. They were afraid of the market itself collapsing. People had begun to doubt not just the Coke brand, but all carbonated drinks in general. In that atmosphere of panic, families had started giving their children fruit juice or bottled water instead of cola. The ground of the battlefield was literally sliding out from under them. This shift in vision leads us to the most surprising turn of the war, I think, the test of creative vision. The big brother Coca-Cola had stayed stuck with only its four main brands for decades: Coke, Diet Coke, Sprite, and Fanta. While they were defending that narrow area to the death, the second child, Pepsi, decided to change the rules of the war completely. Hill's 14th rule shines here: creative vision. Sometimes the greatest war is not defeating the enemy on their own field, but creating a new battlefield where the enemy doesn't exist at all. I think Pepsi management read very well that people no longer wanted to just drink sugary water. They went and incorporated snack giants like Frito-Lay, Quaker Oats, Tropicana fruit juices, and water brands like Aquafina into their organization. What was Coke doing at that time? When Red Bull came to them for cooperation, they turned away that massive energy drink opportunity, saying, "We are just a soda company, brother." What they called accurate thinking had literally turned into an obsolete obsession for them. When we look at their charts today, a huge portion of PepsiCo's revenue comes not from cola, but from those food products and non-carbonated drinks we mentioned. Pepsi simply left the drink war and started fighting for the entirety of our stomachs. This is a magnificent creative vision. And this is exactly why we need to look at that incredible espionage event we mentioned at the very beginning, the secret theft case in 2006 with a different eye now. Think about it. When that employee came to Pepsi's door with Coca-Cola's deepest secrets, why did Pepsi call the FBI? That was the part I was really stuck on. According to Hill's rule, wasn't Pepsi's sole purpose to destroy the older brother? Definiteness of purpose, right? That was the purpose. But a knife is left on your table on a silver platter with which you can cut your biggest enemy's jugular, and you hand that knife over to the police. Doesn't this contradict the nature of competition? Why did you show mercy to your enemy? Because exactly at this point, one of Hill's deepest, most philosophical principles, the 17th rule, comes into play: cosmic habit force. Hill usually defines this concept as a universal order, where the positive or negative habits you build accumulate to create their own momentum, their own karma. In the business world, its equivalent is this: the ecosystem of the market, the collective trust. If you steal a competitor's trade secret or turn a blind eye to such a theft, it means you are no longer competing. It means you are completely destroying the rules of the system. If you flip the table to win the game, tomorrow there will be no table left to play on. The prosecutor of the time, David Namias, expressed this very beautifully after the incident. He said that when trade secrets are violated, not just one company is harmed, society is harmed, and the functioning of the market collapses entirely. Pepsi saw this. Pepsi knew that honest competition was not stealing the enemy's documents, but producing more creative, more innovative values than them. If you legitimize theft, tomorrow you legitimize your own employees selling your multi-billion-dollar secrets too. Once that cosmic habit of trust is broken, no mastermind alliance, no emotional customer bond can save you from that pit. Ethics is not just a moral choice. It is the most rational strategy for long-term survival. The war has to have rules like this. In that case, let's slowly wrap up our deep dive for today. And you, the entrepreneur listening to me, what should you take away for your own life, your own business from these century-old cola wars and Napoleon Hill's rules? First, there is this. If you are the second child in the market, see this not as a disadvantage, but as a massive area of freedom to break rules and innovate, because Pepsi's energy came from here. Second, even if it is a crisis you created yourself, like in the new Coke example, if you can learn the right lesson from defeat, you will discover that deep emotional bond in the consumer's brain and become more invincible than before. But remember, no matter how much the product is loved, if you freeze that credit of trust by being arrogant in a moment of crisis, you will go bankrupt. And third, creative vision, carrying the war to a completely different front. Creative vision is redrawing the boundaries of the market. Of course, you will do this without damaging that sense of trust in the market, the cosmic habit force. In other words, today we saw that brands aren't just bottles on shelves. They enter our brains and even manipulate our rational sense of taste, and how million-dollar crises can suddenly turn into advantages. It was magnificent. It was a truly eye-opening journey. Now I ask you, the one listening to me, tomorrow, when you go to the market, open the door of that cooler and put that drink in your basket. Are you really the one choosing it? Is your brain really making a rational decision at that moment? Or has the cosmic habit force that giant companies have been weaving into your mind for decades already made that decision on your behalf? Even thinking about it is a bit chilling. In your own business, career, or simplest daily choices, which of your actions are you continuing just because of that nostalgic sense of belonging a brand or an authority sold to you? I think it's well worth reflecting on. See you in the next Catalyst Power. Goodbye for now.